What's up, guys? It's Nathan here. Today, we have a special guest, Simon Pressley, who's founder and managing director of Propertyology, as well as Hall of Fame inductee in the Real Estate Institute of Australia. Simon, welcome to the show.
Hi, Nathan. Thank you for having us back.
There's a lot of concerns around how high interest rates are going to go, what's going to happen to the property market. You've previously said property prices could double. What does the next 12 to 24 months look like for the property market?
I think certainly what happens in the next 12 months with interest rates will play a significant role in that. The Reserve Bank, I guess they make those decisions and they don't make them months in advance. Their current commentary, they seem very confident that inflation will start to settle down very early in 2023. And I think that will determine what they do with interest rates. But I'm anticipating that large parts of next calendar year, there won't be much movement at all with interest rates. And really, the only real missing link for strong property markets right now and throughout this calendar year, Nathan, has been confidence, which is the fear and the lack of clarity that rising interest rates has created in some people's minds. But the fundamentals are incredibly strong.
And how is it that banks and economists consistently get it wrong? We know with COVID, they were predicting there was going to be an unprecedented downfall in the property market. You correctly predicted it. So how is it they consistently get it wrong?
Well, I mean, no one's ever going to get it right, including myself. The banks and the economists you referred to there, the thing is there's actually nowhere in society, Nathan, nowhere that teaches property market analysis. It's not learnt anywhere. A lot of people think that banks and economists have a better grasp of it because they've got economics degrees. Take it from someone who's made a life out of studying property markets. There's nothing in an economics degree that teaches people about property markets. Nothing. A lot of these people are highly risk averse. They've got very little personal experience buying real estate, so they've got no skin in the game. They don't have the vested interest that I have as a very active investor to really understand the complexities of property markets. It's really powerful to, when you're putting your own money in the game, to have a lot of confidence about what's happening here, and it encourages you to learn from past experiences as well.
You see, and we see the media even saying the same, the market's going to fall. I know in some areas you're still saying there's growth. Why is there such a disconnect to what the media is saying and what you're seeing on the ground level?
Look, now and always, Nathan, whatever is happening in the Sydney and Melbourne property market always gets reported as if that's all of Australia. It's not that long ago, 2017 and 2019, when Sydney and Melbourne were in a significant downturn. The rest of Australia was not in a downturn at all, but the national headline said Australian property market downturn. That's always happened. It's happening again now. We've got 8 capital cities and we've got 400 individual regional townships, some big, some small, some medium sized. But of all those 400, there's only 2 locations out of 400 where the standard price of a house today is less than what it was this time 12 months ago. And surprise, surprise, those 2 locations are Sydney and Melbourne. So that dominates what people read in their device. No 2 markets are ever the same, now or always. The other reason, I guess, why there's always seems to be a lot of negativity about property market reporting. Unfortunately, a lot of the people behind the keyboard of those stories, a lot of the journalists actually writing them, hate seeing property prices go up because they don't have one themselves, and they've elected to live in Australia's 2 most expensive cities. So they love to see property prices go down, and I think they abuse the privilege they have as informing the Australian public by creating doom and gloom stories when often there's no justification for the doom and gloom.
Now, we saw Tim Lawless come out, who's a director of CoreLogic Research, saying that he expects the bottom of the market to be at the end of this year with a swift recovery into the first quarter of 2023. Do you believe we're going to see a V-shaped correction, or what type of recovery do you think we'll have?
Well, I'd say that we actually, most of Australia actually doesn't need recovery. Despite what people are reading every day, property prices are worth a lot more now than at the start of the year. In the last couple of months, some locations have gone from previously experiencing mild growth. Let's say the first 6 months of this year, most locations in Australia still had around about 10% growth in just 6 months. I mean, that's spectacular growth in just 6 months. Some of those locations are now going sideways, so recovery needed. Flat markets happen from time to time. And some of those have had very small rates of growth. So I would beg to differ that recovery is required, but we could actually see some positive changes to property policies in the next 12 months. Unless someone's been living under a rock, they should appreciate that Australia has the single worst housing shortfall in Australia's 230-year history, particularly rental accommodation. It doesn't exist. We've just opened up the international border. Over this financial year, the federal government anticipates seeing 700,000 foreigners move to Australia, either as international students or as permanent residents, 700,000, and we can't house our existing population already. So the pain in the ribs to all three levels of government, state, federal and local, will become significant very, very soon if it's not already. And they're going to have to make some policy changes to improve rental supply. And there's only one sustainable solution for rental supply, and that's to encourage property investors, because property investors are more than 90% of Australia's total rental stock. But what about 3.3 million rental properties in Australia, and 91% of those are owned by property investors. So if we need more rental supply, and no one can argue that, we've got people living in cars, mate. So we need it. We might see things like APRA soften credit policy. We might see some stamp duty initiatives, but they're going to have to do something, because properties don't fall out of the sky, do they?
100%. It'll be interesting to see what they actually do there. And I guess on that point of, the property investor, how do you understand which markets are going to grow? And especially for investors out there that might see this as an opportunity, particularly with such a shortfall in the market at the moment.
Yeah, look, it's my learnings as someone who studied Australian real estate history. The thing that always has the biggest influence on a property market is the local economy. So not the national economy, yes, that affects everything, but the economy of an individual town or city will always have the biggest influence on property markets. And this is why in 1 year you can have a location that's grown by 20%, you can have another location that's declined by 5%, and you can have a bunch of others that have had 7 or 8%. It's their local conditions that determine their local property market, and the local economy is what influences consumer confidence and household finances. Those two things combined is what determines how many people buy real estate in a chosen city. So of all the things that Propertyology spends copious amounts of hours researching, and we love numbers, we produce facts and figures all the time, but that local economic stuff's not in numbers. We're reading all sorts of industry reports, economic reports, announcements, government announcements, and it's sort of joining all those dots and making an educated assessment about what the economy of each of those 400 locations will look like a couple of years from now.
Definitely very interesting. And are there any common denominators that you see between areas and places that you find that is good investments?
Well, look, we will always only ever invest in diverse economies. That's how you mitigate your risk as an investor. You take the volatility out of markets. We always avoid Australia's most expensive cities. I think it's common sense. We've all heard the saying, don't place all your eggs in the one basket. If someone's got $1 million budget, great, but it makes no sense to me to put $1 million into one asset. A share investor wouldn't do that in the stock exchange. So the same reasons property investors wouldn't do it. So we avoid, even if the outlook's good from time to time, we avoid the Sydney, Melbourne, Canberras, Byron Bays, those really expensive places. Got to be very mindful of the housing supply pipeline. That can cause some pain. Some things specific to economies, and a reason why people shouldn't be fearful about property markets. Right here, right now, the Australia's economy has never been this good in more than 50 years. We've got our lowest unemployment rate since way back in 1974, and we've got 400,000 extra jobs advertised today that we can't fill. So these are strong fundamentals for property markets. So it's all the decisions, I guess, behind that. We're excited about the huge infrastructure pipeline that Australia has as part of the pandemic recovery, economic recovery. Federal and all the state governments and some city councils sort of approved all these infrastructure projects. Many of them haven't even started yet. So we've already got all these jobs I just mentioned created, but we can't fill them. We've got a lot more jobs to come when the construction of these projects commence. Renewable energy, I think everyone knows that's the earth that we live on these days, and there's lots of exciting projects popping up around Australia, that sort of stuff. We're going to see a big boost to tourism. Tourism's already strong, but the international borders open now, and there are hundreds of thousands, millions of people who live in different countries, Nathan, who've been craving to get back to Australia. So that's going to benefit lots of property markets. We're very bullish.
And I mean, there's a lot of myths in the property market, theories. You should buy near shops, you should buy in capital cities, which you said weren't really probably something that you'd necessarily look like with your advice. But how does the average investor challenge the status quo?
Well, I'm a big advocate. If you already own the family home, when I say own, that doesn't mean you don't have a mortgage on it, but you've got to see all of Australia, those 400 locations, as the equivalent of the companies in the stock exchange. If you own a family home in one city, the first of the 400 locations you should rule off your list is your hometown, because you've already got capital into that market. So it'd be like the share investor saying, I've already got $10,000 worth of shares, they're all in CBA, and then they get some more money and they go and buy some more CBA shares or ANZ shares. There's no diversity with that. So you've only got yourself to blame if things don't go well. Let it be known that region has nothing at all to do with risk. Each of those 400 regional townships are all very different, the same as the 8 capital cities are very different. Darwin and Hobart are very different to Sydney, and Sydney's very different to Brisbane. We need to understand the differences, in each of these locations across Australia, but we're spoilt for choice. This year and every single year, when you've got 400 individual townships that you can put some money in, no matter what the media is saying in any given year, with so many locations to choose from, it's always a great time to invest. The key question is never when, Nathan, it's always where.
And what do you think is likely to happen with interest rates? If you're seeing Goldman Sachs saying they potentially could get to a terminal rate of 4.1%, CommBank saying a 3.1%, there's quite a varied estimation there. What do you think is going to happen?
Look, I don't have a strong view on it. And to be honest, I've trained myself over the years not to pay too much attention to that. You just do your head in. And again, as I said earlier, those who make those decisions, that's the board at the RBA, they don't know from 1 month to the next what they're going to do. This time, just 12 months ago, there was increasing speculation that at some stage over the next few years, interest rates will rise, just 12 months ago. And the RBA, who make those same decisions, kept saying, yes, our next movement will be up. We don't know when that will be, but we're in no rush. Those are the words from the RBA governor. And now they're apologising, saying, yeah, we did suggest that it might not be till 2024 before we had our first upward movement. So that was just 12 months ago. So I just find it a waste of energy to read Goldman Sachs, economists, banks. I couldn't give a rat's what they're saying about what might happen next month or the next year about interest rates, because no one bloody knows, mate. But what we do know is that property markets go up, down, sideways, and it's not controlled by interest rate movements. A whole bunch of other things are a lot more important to property markets than interest rates. For those who are interested in investing in their future, you need to focus on your future, not the RBA or anything else. And if you can afford to invest in your future and you're not, you're only harming yourself. Because when you get older and you don't want to work anymore, or your health doesn't allow you to not work anymore, well, you won't be able to enjoy the lifestyle that you could have had because you're delayed and you got caught up in negative crap. Focus on what you can control. Inflation's a good example. A lot of hysteria about inflation. It's just a bloody word. Some things cost more today than what they did this time last year. But what I'd encourage everyone who cares about their future to do is look internal and ask yourself honestly, am I okay? Am I safe? Most people, when they answer that question, they go, I've got a bigger wage now than 2 years ago. My house is worth 50% more today than 3 years ago. My job has never been more stable. My employer's craving for more staff. I live in a country where there's no shelter. If you focus on those things, there's nothing negative about that, right? So if you can afford to invest now because you owe it to your future, and ignore that other negative stuff. The inflation piece, if you need to make adjustments to your personal household budget, do it. But the official numbers that are coming out of the ABS suggest that whilst we hear about inflation every bloody minute, most people have got more money than what they need. How do we know that? Because one of the things that the ABS put out is essential expenditure, household expenditure, and discretionary expenditure. Discretionary expenditure has continued to go up significantly throughout this calendar year. So if people were really struggling with their mortgage, mate, they wouldn't be booking record amounts of nights at hotels and dining out as much and buying luxury clothes. That's what the official data says. So most people listening to this, when they hear the word inflation, they might have a tinge of fear or uncertainty. Or it's just the media putting that in there. But ask yourself, am I okay? And most people, when they ask that question themselves, the answer will be yes. And most people that they know, their family and friends, will say yes as well. So the world's actually in good shape.
And I guess on that point, this whole thing, everything's very emotive. And I know you talk about you should keep the emotion out of the decision and you have a very mechanical view. How do investors implement that, or maybe explain how that might be for, how you look at that?
Look, if you're an investor, and it's easy for me to say this, but this is training to actually implement it when you're making decisions. Property investing is not about the bricks and the mortar, because the bricks and the mortar doesn't grow. All the bricks and the mortar does is invoke feelings and investing is a financial decision at the end of the day. The last thing anyone should want to do when it comes to making a financial decision is to allow feelings to get in the way, because every human's got feelings, but every human's feelings are different. Nathan, you might like one thing and I dislike that same thing. So if we're making financial decisions and our feelings are influencing it, we're not giving ourselves a chance of realizing our full potential in regards to making good decisions. So yeah, rule number one, disregard the bricks and the mortar. If I was to put a percentage value on it, Nathan, I would say that about 80% of an investment property's performance is determined by getting the city selection correct. If you get the city selection wrong, it doesn't matter what bloody property you bought, it's going to be a disappointing outcome. So to get the city selection right, you need to be open-minded. 8 capital cities, 400 regions. What do you need to focus on? Not the media commentary. What's the outlook for the local economies like? Now, people might be hearing that and going, how the hell do I do that? Yeah, it's not a hobby. It's a full-time occupation. That answer is probably not what a lot of listeners wanted to hear. They might hope there's a shortcut to it. If there was, I'd be doing it. My full-time job is to analyze markets. There is no shortcut. It's hard work.
And what would make a good investment over the next 5 years?
A good investment, some of the things I said earlier, don't place all your eggs into one basket. So, to us, we're active in numerous markets all over Australia today, but in all cases, the typical house costs no more than $750,000. Asset type, I mentioned house there deliberately. There's decades of evidence. Stock standard detached houses grow more in value than apartments, townhouses, duplexes, houses with swimming pools. So you get the asset selection right, asset type right, but the most important thing is get the city location right first.
And did you have any other final thoughts for our viewers out there?
Look, in this time with so much concern about interest rates, maybe it's a good reminder for people, even if you're doing more than okay, as I honestly believe most people are, it might be a good reminder to allocate some time over the Christmas, New Year holidays to actually review your budget. I don't know how many people actually have a structured budget. I mean, budget doesn't mean you have to live frugally. Budget just means you've got a structured way of where you allocate money to. And a lot of people probably have a heck of a lot of discretionary luxuries in there that, whilst we enjoy those things, it doesn't necessarily mean that we have to do it. So that's my general advice for people. And it's actually quite comforting when you do that every so often. It sort of has a way of cleansing the brain a bit and reminding yourself, yeah, I'm actually going well.
And how can our viewers find you if they're searching for you?
The Propertyology website, propertyology.com.au. I'd suggest for a new visitor to that website, the menu tab up the top, click on the Insights tab. I personally author all those blogs that are there, roughly 3 or 4 per month. There's no sales material in that. Most of them contain a lot of high quality research backed up by evidence, data, and it might challenge some people. While you're there, you can subscribe to our fortnightly newsletter. Again, it's not salesy. It's good quality property market information. Costs you absolutely nothing.
Simon, thank you very much for your time today.
My pleasure. Thanks, Nathan.